To Merryfield's Gardening Advisor, brought to you by the experts at Merryfield Garden Center. Join us as we discover beautiful plants, new trends, and exciting ideas for your landscape. So let's get growing together. Merryfield's Gardening Advisor, bringing out the best in your garden.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Merryfield's Gardening Advisor. I'm Debbie Warhurst-Kapp.
And I'm David Yost.
And we are very glad you could join us today here on our show. We have a very interesting show for you today.
Well, it seemed only fitting that coming right off the 4th of July celebrations last night and everything to continue with a little bit of a patriotic theme.
Right.
So today we're going to talk about some of our founding fathers, but also their interest in gardening and horticulture, because you have to think back in that day, of course, it was an agrarian society. They all come from a farming background. A lot of them have strong interest in horticulture, so we're going to take a little bit of a virtual tour of their homes and estates and plantations, look at some of the plants that they utilize there, but also try to make the connection between what was going on back there in the early 1800s and how that affects some of our gardening today.
So you too can have a garden like our founding fathers?
Yes, we can, or at least, you know, like I say, we're going to adapt it.
That's right.
Try and make that connection between Independence Day and gardening.
That's great. We do have a lot to talk about, so we're not going to be taking phone calls today. But before we get started, first of all, I hope you all had a wonderful 4th, a safe and happy 4th. I made the mistake of coming back through Fairfax last night from Falls Church about 10:30, and traffic was at a snail's pace.
Oh, was it? Well, I heard all the fireworks going off, Debbie, but I was already in bed. That's getting old, isn't it? When you just kind of say, well, I'm glad everybody's having a good time.
That's right. Have a good time.
I'm just ready to go to sleep, and all the noise is going off. Right.
Well, it was a beautiful day, so hope everyone enjoyed it. Wanted to mention before we get started that our tent sale at Merryfield Garden Center is in full swing at all 3 locations. Actually, we have a physical tent at our Merryfield and Fair Oaks locations. I think our Gainesville location has theirs inside, so still a tent sale, but great bargains on selected gardening items, home decor, Christmas items, statuary, containers. The list goes on and on. So stop by. We kind of replenish. The girls are up there replenishing every day, I notice. And so you're going to find something different every day. So take advantage, 50 to 75% and more off. And we do this every summer, and it'll go on for a few weeks. So
yeah, I make the analogy. It's just like cleaning out your own home or garage. You go in there and you keep kind of layer by layer digging further back in there and saying, oh, well, this needs to go, this needs to go. And so we just, as Debbie was saying, we just keep replenishing it, so you keep on shopping.
So hopefully you'll find something that you just can't live without. There's some really cool things in there.
Yeah, and at 50 to 75% off, I don't know anybody that can resist a bargain.
I know, really.
Certainly not me.
Well, this was really fun. David and I were on the computer the other day looking at some of these founding fathers and some of I love history anyway, so this is I've been excited about this show.
Yeah, I did too, and like I said, it's a nice opportunity to sort of combine the two. So we're going to begin talking a little bit about George Washington. Of course, when we talk about our founding fathers, George Washington, commander of the Continental Army, coming out as a Revolutionary War hero. He was sort of the unanimous, undisputed only choice, I think, that could have been the first president. He had such a stellar reputation in establishing our nation's independence that he was, if they've also said, if there was a monarchy or if there could have been a king of the United States,
George
would have been him. Some people even referred to him as His Excellency, though he, of course, rejected all reference to any monarchy that's there.
And there's his beautiful home, Mount Vernon.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is you have to recognize that these people, they were first and foremost farmers.
Right.
George Washington, of course, he started his career as a young man as a surveyor, and during his surveying work, throughout the East Coast and everything, he really developed an appreciation for the native vegetation and the flora and the fauna and the outdoors and the new country, and established himself later on after marrying Martha, who was the most wealthiest widow in Virginia. So he kind of stepped himself up into the statesman kind of level through marriage, and at the same time took on the role of plantation farmer. And so that was Mount Vernon you're seeing. And the thing is, these are such local landmarks.
Right.
and I know a lot of us that live in this area don't always take the time to go visit them. Well, first message here, go visit. Because it's just an important part of our history, and well, as if you're a gardener, you've got to appreciate it. So that, of course, that was Mount Vernon that we looked at. It's there, you know, that was his primary estate. But I said a lot of these people, it was really agriculture,
right.
It was production,
I mean, they needed to eat.
Farming.
Right.
Exactly. So they looked a lot of times at plants from a utilitarian perspective, and this is the terraced garden out back with the herbs and vegetables and fruit trees. Very innovative. Well, I should say innovative in terms of, you know, compact space. George Washington was always looking and experimenting with ways to improve and modify the soil that's there. So he was constantly bringing these new ideas to gardening. So that's sort of a traditional, formal European sort of layout that you see in there, because he was borrowing on that with his colonial ideas, but adding his innovations and trying new plants, you know, things like artichoke that's in there. You know, we've got the lavender borders that are in there, beans growing. Like I said, there's fruit trees of apples and pears and cherries, you know, growing in espaliers around there. And then what I thought was interesting, the other view of here is you also see the cistern in this next picture. The cistern where he would actually collect water, rainwater and such.
Early recycling.
Exactly, you know, but knowing, you know, again, and he was very hands-on through this, you know,
yes.
even as he was going through the Revolutionary Wars, he was serving the Continental Congresses, he was serving as president, he's constantly engaged in monitoring what's going on, what's being planted, and giving direction to the management of his farm back there. So he's got grapevines growing along there. And so this is hey, he's got a lot of acreage, but he's doing an awful lot in small spaces. That's something that we could think about. He also did have more the ornamental or decorative gardens that we can see here using the boxwood parterres. Now this is really a European style of gardening. You think about this more with the French gardens and the monarchy over in France and England, and you know, having this more formal look. So they did adopt some of those practices and policies there. And of course, this is all owned by the Ladies Mount Vernon Association. And they maintain it in the same condition as George Washington had. So they do a great job. There's ongoing historical research and excavation. You can see in the background there. And these boxwood gardens have been renovated. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in our next segment, but what ended up happening, this was originally designed with dwarf English boxwood, which is sort of the classic boxwood that we use in that garden.
Right.
But there were problems. The boxwoods went in decline, they deteriorated and ended up having to be renovated and replaced. They tried a couple times getting dwarf English boxwood, but then eventually had to go and make some modifications. Added a variety, it's called Justin Brower, a newer variety, it's a little more hardy, and you can see in that picture how effectively it turned out.
And I think one of our growers, I think when Paul Saunders was here, he was talking about they were involved with
Absolutely,
this,
the
right?
Saunders brothers are boxwood experts. They were part of the team looking at and guiding them on the restoration that's there. And that's the thing, like I said, George Washington's always innovating. Our horticulturist plant industry is always innovating. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these boxwood when we come back and how we've developed them through the breeding and selection process and how that all applies to George Washington's Mount Vernon.
Sounds like a plan. All right, we'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back, everybody. We're getting some gardening ideas from our founding fathers today through David.
Exactly. So we're it's only appropriate here on 4th of July weekend.
That's right.
I hope everybody's making the best of that, having a good time with their families.
Absolutely.
And the weather's perfect to go out there and work in the garden. It's a great way to honor our nation and its history. So we're talking about George Washington and Mount Vernon. Now, like a lot of the plantation owners at the time, now he would purchase surrounding property and adjacent property and build on his holdings that way. And so he did have the opportunity, I guess it was in about 1760, I was looking at, to purchase some property just down the road, which is now known as River Farm. So River Farm was owned by George Washington at one point in time. but still Mount Vernon was really his home. Now you can see some similarities again in the same style of architecture. That's the old historic house, and flanked by the tulip poplar on one side and the big southern magnolia on the other side. It also is right along the Potomac River, but it's got its own interesting history, as it was passed down through the generations. Eventually, the property was at one point being considered for purchase by the Russian embassy. And there was such an uproar, political uproar. I mean, could you possibly imagine this was during the Cold War era, to think about the Russians occupying one of George Washington's homes right there sitting on the Potomac? So the owners made a generous donation to the American Horticulture Society. So River Farm now serves as the headquarters of the American Horticulture Society, which is a nonprofit association for the promotion of horticulture and the educational outreach. And as a part of that, they do participate in some demonstration and trial gardens, and they have an extensive collection that you should take an opportunity to peruse those grounds as well. Now we were talking about the Boxwood parterres back at Mount Vernon.
And what's a parterre, David?
Well, the parterre,
that's a word you may not recognize.
Well, it's not used that often in gardens today, but it was very popular at one time. Back and really during the French were the ones that started this. The French would use plants almost as embroidery.
Like a tapestry.
Right, and you would see those elaborate tapestries if you were ever to visit, some of the castles in France. And, but they would try to recreate that with plants. And so boxwood is the most common and best adapted to that to use in making those little geometric forms and shapes, and then you would fill them with plants like lavender and such to give the color to them.
And they're easy to shape to the form that you
They are, but it's a high maintenance form of gardening because it is symmetrical and it's manicured that's in there. But boxwood being a part of our colonial gardens and still being an extremely valuable plant today and growing in its popularity today, really, because now it's being pressed a lot by the deer population. And the deer don't bother them. So there's been a lot of development, a lot of hybridizing, a lot of selection going in to get us boxwood that are sturdier and hardier, that are lower maintenance and better adapted. And I thought this is, at River Farm, it was established with the American Boxwood Society to show and highlight the different varieties and test them and try them. So you can see everything from upright and pyramidal to the low spreading. There's some variegated ones that are in there. But what was happening back at the Mount Vernon, of course, is they were using the dwarf English, which is sensitive to our clay soil and poor drainage, and they've got some pest problems. They would go into decline. But after trying a couple times with the help of some good consultants, like working with the Saunders brothers and such, they went in, they cultivated, they worked the soil, they added a product that's called Permatil or Stay-Lite that we talk about a lot on this TV show to enhance and improve the drainage. They went in with, like I said, that little variety and improved selection of Korean boxwood called Justin Brower, and they have really turned out to look great. And I brought some examples we'll look at later on that. Now, just going with our pictures, because I know I'm going to run out of time. But while I was there at the Mount Vernon, and we're bouncing back and forth between River Farm and Mount Vernon, this was up sort of by the visitor entrance, where the buses come in and drop you off and such. And I thought what was really interesting, this is a native plant. It's called fragrant sumac or Rhus aromatica. And one of the things that we'll see a lot in the gardens at Jefferson and Washington and Madison is a true appreciation for the native plants and their ornamental value. Sometimes this is mixed up with the poison ivy because it has the 3 leaflets.
You're right.
It's similar in appearance, but this one is not toxic at all. And it's showing it there in flower. It gets this clusters of little red seed pods and everything, which is attractive. It'll go to a brilliant red fall coloration, so it's used a lot to stabilize hillsides. It's kind of a low shrubby ground cover, hedge border type of thing. But again, we have these available at the garden center. It's native, it's tough, it's durable, gives you a lot of seasonal color. It's a plant that's not utilized that often, but it's gaining more attention with more interest in our native plants. Now, closely related to it is the staghorn sumac. You can see similarities there in the compound leaf, the upright leaf sort of flower cluster, or this is actually the seed pod that's in there. Again, these will offer brilliant fall color. They're fantastic for birds that come and feed on these seed pods, even late into the fall and the winter. But this does, again, it suckers. It forms like a big shrubby, woody kind of hedge. It's not that well suited for suburban gardens necessarily, unless you have a shrub border, and it's good for that native plant environment. But again, they've developed, and again, this plant breeding and innovation continues to go on. And I'm going to show you a variety now. It's called Tiger Eyes. Now, Tiger Eyes, this picture was taken down at River Farm. Again, they're trying to demonstrate what you can do with plants and new varieties and so on that's there. I have to think that Washington and Jefferson would be really proud to see this because they like to collect ornamental plants from all over the world. And they would do a lot of their experimentation. I think if they saw what we've been doing with some of our native plants.
It's so nice and bright.
Yeah, and it will get a nice fall color in it too. And just backing up, we'll talk about this a little bit more at Jefferson and Monticello. What they did is they were primarily into farming and vegetable production, but they both recognized the ornamental value, and they took so much pride in our natural heritage here in the New World that they would use native plants in their ornamental gardens. So that's where it takes us plants like that sumac, and how we've continued to build on that interest here. A couple other pictures I'll show super quick, just from River Farm. No, more pictures than I thought. I got to talk faster, Debbie. Oakleaf Hydrangea. Again, this is native to the southeastern U.S., down parts of Georgia, maybe creeping in the southern part of Virginia. But they are just finishing up their flowering right now. And it's such a beautiful, wonderful plant. Both beautiful foliage it's on there, spectacular flowers. It'll get fall color. It even has a little bit of winter interest in it. So this is definitely a favorite shrub of mine. Here, this is planted under that southern magnolia down at River Farm, showing what it can look like at maturity. But again, with showing how this adapts to our gardens today, I'm showing you a picture of a Oakleaf Hydrangea that I'm growing in my front yard, a little townhouse garden. This is a variety, it's called Munchkin.
Munchkin.
Appropriately named.
I was about to say, what an appropriate name for a small plant.
But what I'm really impressed with is it's kind of like it has the normal sized flowers, the normal sized leaf. It's just a squat little grower.
That's great.
I've only had it for 2 years. It's still staying only about 2.5 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide. It's supposed to mature 3, maybe 4 feet. So that's going to work well in compact gardens. Again, back to River Farm, I thought they do such a nice job of showing how we can play with plant colors and combinations. That purple leaf plant is, again, a native plant. It's called Physiocarpus, or 9-bark. This is a variety, though, it's called Diablo, selected specifically for that deep burgundy leaf, and it contrasts so nicely with that chartreuse color, the new growth coming out on the little star magnolia that's there. And again, things like the coneflower and the yarrow, just great color combinations there. Low maintenance plants. I can't see exactly, it looks like it might be I don't know if that's larkspur or maybe even a little bit of baptisia there to give it some of the purple and blue colors in there. But what a great environment for butterflies and pollinators and the flocks in the background. So visit these places. It's great inspiration. You get to see how these plants fit in our gardens today. These are David's pictures that you're seeing. So he was I make a point to get to all these. That's the thing, when you got a little garden, the only way you get your plant fix is to go visit others. And
I tell you, a magnificent sight is from the water, from the Potomac, looking on Mount Vernon. It's great.
So did you get to take the cruise through there?
No, some friends have a boat, and we were just siting there looking at, just being in awe of,
all right,
of the history.
Call me next time you're taking the cruise.
All right, we will. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Do hope everyone had a wonderful 4th of July yesterday. It was such a beautiful day and beautiful way to think about the history of the country, that type of thing. So
Yeah, it is, and it's nice to be able to make this connection with gardening.
Absolutely. So what else do we have?
So that was George Washington. Of course, he could, he's had
Take up the whole hour.
volumes. Exactly. It could take up a whole week talking about his legacy. But we'll move on to our second president, John Adams, who, of course, served as vice president under Washington. Now, I'm going to have to confess, I have never had the opportunity to actually go visit John Adams' house. So
that's in Massachusetts?
In Massachusetts,
yeah.
exactly. So I don't mean to shortchange him. His contributions to the founding of this country is just immeasurable. But he basically says Massachusetts. I just haven't been there. Of course, John Adams, his background, he was a farmer and a lawyer. I mean, this is back in the days when lawyers were not necessarily, high-paid aristocrats. You could actually become a lawyer just through study yourself and so on. But so anyway, my point is here is John Adams came from a very different background. He had less acreage and less money and less influence than some of the others did. But he was first and foremost a farmer. That was his home called Peacefield, which
nice
appropriately named exactly because he just found it so peaceful and so quiet. And when he was going through all the political stresses, that would happen to anybody, going from vice president to presidency and just coming out of the Revolutionary War and trying to build the nation and unify it. He always retreated to his farm there at Peacefield for that peace and solace.
Right, just be around all those beautiful plants.
And even during his presidency, like I said, maintained correspondence and wanted to know what was being planted and keeping up planting dates. So not to shortchange him, but he was basically not so much an ornamental garden, but really, again, producing food for the family and a little bit extra for sale, and definitely hands in the dirt farmer. But we're going to kind of bump forward now to Thomas Jefferson.
Monticello.
Exactly. Again, just a Virginia landmark. Just a couple hours from here, 2.5 hours from here. It certainly could be done as a day trip, or why not make it overnight?
I've done that a few times myself.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to point out right there at Monticello is on each side those really tall trees, about 50-foot tall trees. That's the tulip poplar. That is the largest native species of tree here in Virginia. And all of them, the Washington, Jefferson, Madison, all claim this to be possibly their favorite tree of all. Now, you don't see this utilized in modern-day landscapes because we just don't live on large plantations.
Right, don't have the space.
Exactly, because you can see the size that they mature into, and they'll get that size and larger. But it really shows, I think, their appreciation for the native flora and fauna, because whether it was, Washington out spending his time as surveyor, you think about Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase and sending Lewis and Clark out, they were just so inquisitive and curious about the plants of the New World that are here, and recognized the value of them so much that they used those as ornamental plants in their look towards the New World and looking away from Europe. But what Thomas Jefferson was best known for, and hands down, was a real focus of his, was his interest in vegetables.
Now, he was a vegetarian, right?
Exactly. Thomas Jefferson himself was a vegetarian, not necessarily a purist. I mean, he'll throw a ham bone or something in with the beans, that type of thing. But his records show the low estimates saying he might have had as many as 250 varieties of vegetables.
Wow.
And as possibly as many as 330. So
that's amazing.
Definitely experimenter. And what they would do is, because he looked at the importance of agriculture and the need to sustain ourselves and the need to produce our own food, he would import seeds from a network of friends anywhere in the world. So while he appreciated our native vegetation, primarily from ornamental perspective, there's even stories I was reading a little bit about his stealing some rice out of Italy, some Highland rice stuffed in his pockets that he could have easily been arrested for when he was visiting there. But most of the time it was above board and sharing with friends overseas and all different parts of the world, importing and exporting seeds in his correspondence. And of course this goes on through his entire political career. You think about, I'm kind of working on the Declaration of Independence. I'm serving as Secretary of State, and by the way, ambassador and president.
In my free time.
And during all this, right, in my spare time, I'm keeping records of what's being planted, when it's being harvested, sharing seeds with other statesmen around the world. So, I mean, it was ingrained in his being.
Right.
And it's great as gardeners we can all come together, even through some of our political differences that are there. So that's kind of an example. His favorite was peas. If you, like any gardener, can you really pick a favorite? But he did love growing peas.
I know.
And there was always a little bit of a competition to see who could get the first one there. Now, he also had to supplement. I was reading he would purchase vegetables from the slaves in this property who also maintained their own gardens for their food. And first on that list was lettuce. He ended up having to purchase lots of lettuce. Now, this is not Mount Vernon, Monticello. This would be my back
David
deck.
Yost's estate.
Which is, again, greatly scaled down.
That's right.
But I'm taking a little bit of a tangent showing how we can apply some of the same interest, to our gardens today.
Right.
So what I did this year is I just grew this lettuce mix, one of these preset salad mixes, tossed it into a window box. It grows there in the back deck railing, and it grows up with this mix of different lettuces. I go through, was doing this last night. I go through and I just cut off a little section. I get my Joyce Chin scissors.
Great. There you go, Peg.
Exactly. Homage to Peg. And get me those Joyce Chins, still use them. So trim that off, toss that into a salad bowl. A couple days later, I'll trim another few inches and then another few inches, and then it continues to renew itself. So the lettuce was able to take that box and move it from the hot part of my deck, and now it's moved over to the front porch where it gets a little bit of shade, and I'm going to see if I can keep that producing for me all summer long. So the thing is, just like our founding fathers knew we have to produce some of our own food, there is a renewed interest in producing our own food, participating in our food chain. That's fantastic to see us coming back. And tomatoes, of course, are America's #1 and most popular. Now, back in the days of Jefferson, tomatoes still had a dicey reputation. There was question as to whether they were poisonous or not. But Jefferson was an early adopter, and he was one of the first to adopt and start growing tomatoes in this country. He grew several varieties.
Right.
Keep going, or do I have to take a break?
Why don't we take a quick break?
All right.
And we'll finish this in a moment.
Okay, we're going to talk more about tomatoes at Jefferson when we
Sounds
get
like
back.
a plan. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm David Yost from Merrifield Garden Center, and nothing beats the taste of fresh, homegrown herbs, vegetables, fruits, and berries. And whether it's a backyard orchard or growing herbs in a container, we have everything you need for your garden. And if you're new to gardening or new to growing edibles, our experts will be happy to coach you on a bountiful harvest. So come into Merrifield Garden Center today and let's get started.
Hope everybody had lots of food yesterday.
Exactly.
We were talking earlier about some of the neat sauces and things we have in the Stonewall kitchens, and so we put a few out.
Well, that's why I've tried to put a little token in there.
That's right.
The barbecue and cookout time,
That's
too.
right. That's right.
And boy, wasn't the weather nice to get to go out and enjoy without all the humidity and stuff. Yeah. So real quickly, I'm going to wrap things up.
We were talking about tomatoes.
Right.
Okay.
So tomatoes, have been doing pretty well this year. The weather's been conducive for tomato growing, but I've seen a couple little problems out there I want to touch on. I can't do a garden show without talking about some
Not David.
insect or disease thing. So some of the diseases that I'm seeing out there most frequently is this one that's called Septoria leaf spot.
We have a lovely picture there. Yes.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh,
but,
wow.
But it's a bunch of these little tiny spots that you can see in there, and it causes leaves to yellow and wither up, and those spots can transfer on the fruit and cause blemishes. So I'm seeing some of that out there. Now, ideally, in the perfect world, I think the best way to manage this disease is if you can really give tomatoes the room that they need to grow, space them out, 5, 6 feet apart, plant them in cages, keeping them elevated up off the ground. This allows really good air circulation around, good sunlight, and helps to prevent the diseases. So in the next picture you see this is sort of an example. If you have the space, if you have the luxury of room and space where you can really give these plants the room they need to grow. Tomatoes, of course, they're vines, so they just keep growing, 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 growing. You know, it's not unusual to see them get 7, 8, 9 foot tall over time. So if you can keep them up off the ground, keep the ground protected and all that, that's really fantastic. But the real life examples that I see at the plant clinic is, you know, we're limited on space. We don't have these big gardens. We sort of crowd things in together, and we get into some of these fungal diseases. And of course, there are treatments for that. You can use things like mancozeb, daconil, copper, different fungicides to help with it.
Then we also have our insects.
Right. Now the stink bug, you might see these occasionally crawling around the house or something. This is what's called the brown marmorated stink bug. It's one that was introduced accidentally into this country. And what it does is it tends to feed on different fruits and vegetables and tomatoes, and you'll see this a lot in peppers, and they'll even go after soybean and corn and crops like that. But their mouth is like this little stylet, like a little syringe, and they poke it into the fruit and suck juices out of the fruit. But as they're doing that, they also inject this little toxin that makes it easier for them to ingest the fluids. And it leaves that little speck that you see, all those little yellow specks. And if you cut into the tomato, you get this kind of white, corky growth in there. And on peppers, for example, it will even cause the fruit to start to rot and deteriorate. So I'm seeing a few of these out there. Again, not like a major outbreak, but if you're seeing those spots on there, that's the stink bug. Again, it's a little difficult to control. You can use things like pyrethrin, which is an organic insecticide, or if you're going the synthetic version, permethrin, which is a synthetic form of it. But you can come in and talk to us to get specific recommendations on that. But I did want to finish real quickly, Jefferson saying, you know, he definitely enjoyed the ornamental plants. He selected a lot of plants specifically for the fragrance. This is a tropical form related to the morning glory, but it's called a snail vine, and it has that very interesting sort of corkscrew type of flower, or I meant to say it's more related to like a sweet pea, because it has a very fragrant blossom, also like a sweet pea. Now, we don't sell this plant at our garden center, at least we don't have it this year, but I just want to kind of, before we left Jefferson, recognize he also valued the beauty of plants as well.
Right.
All right.
Okay, on to Madison.
Madison. Again, James Madison was a close colleague with Jefferson, and they would go around touring a lot of times, sharing their interests. Both politically, they were fairly closely aligned. They lived fairly close together. This is Montpelier.
I have never gotten to go there.
Well, it's only a stone's throw from Monticello.
But doing day trips, I don't get a chance to do both. That's my problem.
But they, they would take horse and buggy rides back and forth to visit each other. So they were guests with each other. They even did garden tours together.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, just like at one time, back when I say Jefferson and Adams, when they were both overseas in Europe, they went on garden tours together. They had a falling out later and didn't maintain. But then, so Jefferson picked up with Madison, and they would go on garden tours up through the northeastern U.S. And really came to appreciate the native vegetation, like I was saying. But really the focus was on trees. They didn't spend a lot of time looking at little wildflowers and some of those, but they were very much into looking at
that lush and
trees.
Gorgeous.
It is, and if you go to these estates, you get to see them in their mature form. So this is at Madison's Montpelier, and he had this little temple constructed, and as he was working on the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, Madison would sit there out in his garden, just collecting his thoughts, contemplating, doing his studies.
What a perfect spot for that.
Exactly, and these are really, I mean, it's amazing to think this is where the ideas and the formation of the basis of our country exists today. So again, this Independence Day weekend, it's a nice thing to recognize.
Absolutely. And then the DuPonts became involved.
Right. Well, again, yes, the the estate was fell into disrepair, as a lot of these do, fall in hard times. And then I can't remember the exact date, but we looked that up, Debbie. What was that, like early early 1920s or something.
I think it was earlier, the early
maybe
1900s.
Early 1900s, right. And DuPont stepped up to the plate and essentially put forward the funds to restore this garden and enhance it, so she's the one that gets credit. And these gardens have evolved over time. Like I said, Madison was, he appreciated the native plants, he appreciated the agricultural production, he was definitely hands-on, but these ornamental gardens didn't really exist in his time. These were added a little bit later, like I said, under the guise of, or direction of Anne DuPont. But still, that very classic style. Again, we've talked about boxwood that's in use all the time, you know, sort of this formal, symmetrical layout that's there. And at the very end of that lane there on my right-hand side, you see the mature southern magnolia. And you'll see southern magnolias in Washington, Jefferson, and Madison's garden, along with the boxwood that are out there. Beautiful, gorgeous plant, again, native to the southeastern U.S., grown for its beautiful foliage, its lush flowers and stuff. Again, we've continued to innovate on these plants, and as our properties have gotten smaller, we've developed plants that get smaller. So today, a lot of times we use Little Gem, which is a selection that stays small.
We're going to tease with that and go to break.
Okay. Well, when we come back, I'm going to show you some magnolias for your home.
Perfect. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We were talking about magnolia.
Right, because I don't want just
promise we get
history, but right, show how these historic plants fit in our gardens today. So I was speaking with the southern magnolia that gets quite large, as you saw in that picture. We now have some varieties that stay smaller. Little Gem is a very popular one. We just took this just the other day out in our garden center. You can see the Little Gem as the evergreen. It's going to mature at about 20 feet tall, maybe 15 feet wide. So even when you consider the parent tree is 60 feet tall or 50 or 60 feet tall, that is considered compact. But it is prolific bloomer that's there. Teddy bear is another small variety, and then I also have a picture of a variety. It's called Alta. Alta is a very columnar, very narrow, upright form of it. So you can have these plants and appreciate their history, but you can have them in your home today, which might sit on 8,000 square feet instead of 8,000 acres. Right. And then one last picture I'll say from Montpelier, again, just talking about the beauty of these large trees. We see like in the center is a Chamaecyparis or Hinoki cypress, has that golden color. The blue Atlas cedar off to the side, kind of that bluish tinge, and then the American holly, more upright. So these were all trees that were planted, back in the early 1900s. So you get to go out there and see what they do over time for you. And of course, with gardening, you're always trying to figure out, am I talking about the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
Right.
Over there, obviously, they're taking long-term view.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's move on now to James Monroe. Our fifth president, James Monroe. Again, he's one of the last of our founding fathers that had actually served in the Revolutionary War and president. So he went through the whole period. I think if I remember correctly, he's even wounded by a gunshot in battle, and then also went on to serve in the formation of the Constitution, eventually serving as president. He, in fact, actually held more public offices than any other president preceding him.
Wow, didn't realize that.
So definitely a true public servant. But he always, his big ambition was to be one of the Southern plantation owners, like all the other Virginia gentlemen. So he had sort of inherited / purchased property called Oak Hill, which is out in Loudoun County. Now, this is not a public garden, it's a private residence, so you'll just have to go for my pictures here.
That's right.
Now, in Monroe's day, the house didn't look like this. Like every one of these homes that we've seen, they've evolved over time. It didn't happen all in one fell swoop. So Monroe's house, various families that lived there built additions onto it, made their modifications. Monroe would have just basically been a southern plantation. It would have been
more farming.
Exactly. It would have been food production.
It would not have looked like this.
Right out the back door, you might have had sort of the kitchen garden, vegetable garden type of look, and then crops planted through the other acreage. But it's so fortunate that it evolved over time, and that the it's inherited, and it now is in the hands of some very avid gardeners.
Absolutely, it's wonderful.
Who truly appreciate the gardens and just absolutely value and love the historic legacy that goes on, and are preserving both the legacy, of the gardens and the home. And you can see here again, these are well-established gardens, been probably started, maybe 100 years ago, with the terracing and the stone work that's in there. These are actually, you can see those really big evergreens, those are yews. Which a lot of us plant along our foundations in the corner of the house. But hey, you give them 100 years or so, and that's what they start to look like, exactly, and develop into really phenomenal trees, along with sort of the formal perennial gardens that are in there. Even add a little touch of outdoor living, where you could actually sit there in a little bit of shade under the wisteria. These were photographs taken back in May when the allium was still in bloom. And she uses allium extensively throughout the garden, getting that sort of violet blue color, a little bit of contrasting of white that's in there. And again, that's the magnolia in the background there, sort of that homage to the classic Virginia plantation type garden that's in there. So just a fabulous place that's out there, and recognizing again what our founding fathers that would do. What I loved here was an example of what can happen in a garden. That large tree that's providing canopy is a very old crabapple, and I have to tell you, I'm not a fan of crabapple. I've never once in all the 17 years have ever put crabapple on their TV show, because I just don't like the tree. But
but here it is.
Here it is. Well, it makes me change my mind, and as I'm saying, hey, you say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, when I see this, I suddenly have a whole new appreciation for what a crabapple can be.
Look at that little seating area over there.
Exactly, and underplanted again with some shade-loving plants. See the ostrich fern. They've maintained wintergreen ground cover in there with a little bit of the jack-in-the-pulpit popping up and brunera. So they've really done just a magnificent job with that. I'm going to super quick go through these last couple pictures because I'm going to run out of time. But the garden deserves more attention. But in the next picture, you see, which you can really only see the trunk or the bark on. This is a Hinoki false cypress, a very mature one, developing that exquisite exfoliating bark that's on there. And that low evergreen is another boxwood. This is a variety, it's called insularis, that stays very close to the ground, only about 2 feet tall and maybe spreading out to about 3 feet wide. I'm using that in my garden today as a little hedge in my little townhouse garden that's there. And one of the things that really makes this garden phenomenal is the stoneworking. See the terracing that's there. I want to take just a super quick look at this walk, and then we'll talk about more detail when we come back. They had these large stones as they were doing the terracing. They were excavated from the site, built this sort of formal central walk down there, and you can see they've done a fantastic job of incorporating plants like you're seeing there, the sedum, that sempervirens planted in the little cracks and crevices of the walkway. That's a look that a lot of us are trying to recreate in our own gardens. When we come back, I'm going to show you a couple ways to do that.
Okay, we'll be right back. There's our rooster.
Yeah, I love my rooster.
Well, we've talked so much, we've run out of time, so you wanted to quickly show some plants.
Yeah, well, we were talking about how that stone walk, and the cracks and crevices, plants incorporated in between there. That's a pretty harsh environment because you have got the foot traffic, limited rooting space, compacted soil. But along with that sedum, some of the plants that work really well in there are thyme, and they do have thyme incorporated in these spots. So there's many different varieties of thyme, and you can see that it's in flower right now. So you get nice foliage that's in there. If you get a chance to, if you happen to trample it or something, you get a little bit of a fragrance that's in there.
That's always nice.
And there's varieties that are like this. So thyme does well in sort of that sunny, dry environment. And one other plant I want to show quickly is this one. It's called Urnaria. Urnaria also is a very good choice for that kind of trying to develop a little ground cover in the cracks and crevices between your walk. I haven't grown this plant myself, but one of the my friends who master gardener has been telling me she's using this as an alternative to lawn. and has assured me this
Cool.
grows under even the harshest conditions. It spreads, it fills in those cracks and crevices. So if you want to recreate
That's
that
great.
kind of look, you can do so with some of these other
Right.
plants.
Now we have two other pictures. This dinosaur intrigued me.
Right. Now, they were so lucky because they had these really big slabs of stone that they were excavating on site, and they found a lot of dinosaur footprints and fossils in there and incorporated this into the wall. I just thought, you know, it's so nice when you get these kind of unique, distinctive things. Not all of us are so
That is
fortunate.
very cool.
But,
I know.
hey, you know, we all have something unique we can
That's
add
right.
to our garden. And then, of course, all of these estates, one of the things they incorporate is just a beautiful view of the Virginia countryside, the rolling hills. And, and to our
absolutely.
Maryland viewers, I guess I am biased, but this, I don't mean to exclude
That's right.
our D.C., Maryland, or even West Virginia viewers and all. But again, the spectacular views are part of that whole story as well.
Well, and we have talked about a lot of plants here. So, as always, you can go to our website, merryfieldgardencenter.com. We put our notes that we go by, so all the plants are listed there, and you can see the shows. Now, this week, our IT person who usually puts it on, I think, is still out of town, so it may not be until Monday before it gets on there this week. But normally, like on Saturday, you know, the same day the show is up.
Right, but these plants that we've talked about, both in the gardens of, you know, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Washington, we have a lot of those plants available in our garden center today. So, you know, come on down and you can get those as well as some of the new introductions we
Right.
discussed.
Now, you've gotten a lot of the information out of this. This is a very cool book, Founding Gardeners. Just chock full of information.
Yeah, the author there, Andrea Wolf, has done a fantastic job of showing how that time, sort of really post-Revolutionary War and even prior to sort of the first presidency, how a lot of these people in their political thinking, our founding fathers, may have opposed each other and had differences and had to negotiate all these political and philosophical differences, but a lot of times they found common ground and common interest as gardeners and as farmers.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think that's a lesson that certainly applies to us today.
I think we have a couple of copies at Fair Oaks, but you can get it.
We have the one that's in your hands and one other on the shelf. So that will be back.
We've got to
at the
get some more of
store
those.
soon.
Great. We've got a few seconds
Okay.
left.
Well, what I wanted to say, now this is switching gears a little bit, fits our theme. This is a brand new
30
plant.
seconds,
Just
I
came
meant.
in. It's called Echinacea. It's a hybrid between Echinacea, the coneflower,
that's right,
and
yes.
Rudbeckia. It just came off the truck yesterday. This is a
Always
brand new introduction
new plants.
for
That's what's exciting.
2014.
Right.
And that's what I want to say. In the
That's
legacy
great.
of our forefathers, always something
Always
new.
something new. Next week, we'll be talking about color in the summer garden. So we hope to see you then. Have a great week. Bye-bye.